He answered a radio call that should not have existed, and the part that still bothers me is how normal it sounded. The voice used the right cadence, the right channel etiquette, and the exact kind of calm you hear from people who know everyone is listening. It was August 2008 in Idaho's Clearwater National Forest, and it asked me to meet at White Sand Relay, a site that had been shut down long enough that most newer staff only knew it as a name on an old maintenance list. 2 backpackers were already overdue when my day started. Their car sat at the Wilderness Gateway trailhead with a cooler in the back seat and the windows cracked, like they planned to be back before the sun slid behind the ridges. Search teams were stacking up at our ranger station. Maps were coming off the wall. Names were going on a whiteboard. Then that radio call came in again, calm and specific, steering me away from the trail and toward an old spur road nobody used unless they had a reason. Up there, the gate was open. The closure sign had been replaced with a fresh one that looked official down to the logo and formatting, like it came out of our own printer. The lock on the relay hut was new too, and the chain had been threaded like someone expected company. When we cut it, we found a backpack inside that wasn't ours, and on the desk, under a paperweight, was a handwritten list of names that belonged to the search team. The last name on the list was the one walking through the door. Let me walk you through what really happened that day, because the official version is clean and short, and it leaves out the parts that made it possible. At the time, I was 34. I worked as a forest ranger out of the Powell Ranger Station, and my name is Grant. Most people just called me Grant because there weren't many of us on the Powell side who could respond fast, drive rough roads without thinking, and still keep the paperwork straight afterward. That morning, I was already in uniform when my phone rang. I hadn't poured coffee yet, and I was standing at the sink with the faucet running because I like the sound in the house when I'm waking up. Dispatch said it like she was reading from a checklist, which is what she was doing. 2 overdue hikers, vehicle located at Wilderness Gateway, plates match the report. No contact since yesterday afternoon. I asked for names. She gave them to me, and I wrote them on the notepad by the sink because that's how I keep facts from drifting. 2 men in their early 20s, friends out of Spokane, planned route on Moose Creek Trail. One had asthma, last family contact Sunday afternoon. The caller was a sister who sounded tired and apologetic, like she was worried she was making a fuss and we'd tell her to stop wasting our time. The station looks calm from Highway 12, the way most public buildings do from the road. It's buildings and pine and a flag, and if you pull in as a visitor, you see a map kiosk and a little gravel lot. Inside, it's radios, clipboards, dusty helmets, and problems that don't show up on postcards. When I walked in, Rena was already there. She was a seasonal ranger, smart and alert, always early, and she had the habit of looking at details twice before she spoke. She held up a printed incident sheet and asked, "Did they sign the trail register?" Her tone was practical, but I could hear the edge in it because missing people turned the day sharp. I told her not at the station, but they might have signed the trailhead box. Our district recreation officer, John, came in right behind her with a helmet in his hand and that tight expression people get when they're trying not to sound worried in front of staff. John said volunteers were coming and the county was sending a deputy to coordinate. I told him to set up a staging table, start a resource list, and pull the last maintenance notes we had for the Moose Creek corridor. I told Rena we were going to the vehicle and the register box, and I said it out loud on purpose, the way you do when you want everyone in the room to know the plan. In retrospect, that detail matters more than it should. Rena followed me out to my truck, and she paused at my windshield. "Did you get that note?" she asked, and she pointed. Someone had tucked a folded piece of paper under my wiper blade like a flyer. I pulled it free, and what I had in my hand was a photocopy of a closure notice, the type we post when a spur road is unsafe or washed out. The format was close enough to ours that a casual glance would accept it, but the date at the bottom was today, and the signature line had a name I didn't recognize. Rena watched my face. "That's not ours," she said. I folded it carefully and put it in my pocket because my first thought wasn't murder, it was someone's trying to start trouble. And in our world, trouble comes in a lot of forms. I also didn't like the idea that someone had walked up to my truck while it was parked at a government facility and felt comfortable touching it. We drove east on Highway 12 along the river corridor with the water on one side and steep forest on the other. The Clearwater swallows cell signal like it's hungry. One minute your phone works, the next minute it's a brick with a screen. The day was bright but not hot. The smell in the air was pine and river rock warmed by sun. It should have felt like a normal Monday, and that mismatch is part of what made it worse. At the Wilderness Gateway trailhead, we found the car immediately. Dark sedan, Washington plates, no people. The cooler in the back seat was half full of melted ice. There were fast food cups in the front and a crumpled receipt, the kind you get from a drive-thru on your way into the woods. Nothing about it screamed crime. It looked like a normal start to a weekend, the kind we see all summer. Rena opened the trail register box and scanned the page with her finger, steady and quick. They signed in yesterday at 2:10 p.m., she said. Destination Moose Creek Trail, overnight, planned return Sunday. Today was Monday, and you don't need more than that to understand the gap. I took photos of the vehicle, the plate, the dashboard, the cooler, and the register entry, because if you don't document early, you end up guessing later. I checked the ground near the car, mostly out of habit. A few shoe prints and dust, a drag mark that looked like a duffel bag had been pulled from the trunk, nothing that told me a story. Rena walked to the bulletin board and stopped hard. There was a small printed sign zip-tied to the board, fresh paper, fresh ties, placed at eye level like it wanted to be seen. It read, "Trail closed, return to vehicle, contact ranger by radio." Under that line was a frequency and a channel label. Rena stared at it, then looked at me. "That's our district channel," she said quietly, like saying it loud would make it more real. I cut the zip ties, bagged the sign, and felt something tighten in my throat. Nobody posts a sign like that at a public trailhead unless they're us, or they want people to think they're us. Rena asked, "Could someone be messing with hikers?" I told her maybe, but the truth is, I didn't know if the target was the hikers or the response. We walked up the trail a short distance to the first junction because I wanted to confirm they'd actually entered and hadn't turned around and gone somewhere else. About a quarter mile in, we found a cheap plastic water bottle at the edge of the path, half full, with scuffs around it, like someone stepped off trail and came back. Rena crouched and pointed. "2 sets of prints," she said. "1 boot, 1 trail shoe. The forest there is dense. The path bends and you lose sight fast. I didn't like the idea of pushing deeper with just the 2 of us, no deputy yet, and a sign telling hikers to call us on a radio channel like we were running some kind of backcountry customer service line. We turned back and made the decision you make when you're trying to be smart, not brave. Back at the lot, my radio crackled with dispatch. "Unit 36, check in." I keyed up and answered, and as soon as I did, dispatch's voice shifted into a different register. "Grant, did you just call on the district channel asking for a meet at White Sand?" she asked. My thumb paused on the push to talk. "No," I said. "What did it sound like?" Dispatch said, "Male voice. Used your unit number. Said you needed access keys. Requested meet at White Sand Relay." Rena looked at me like she'd stepped onto thin ice. White Sand Relay had been decommissioned. The road up there wasn't maintained. The hut was supposed to be locked and empty, and the repeater had been taken offline years earlier. In the normal flow of work, nobody should be transmitting from there, and nobody should be talking about it unless they were reading off an old document. "Dispatch," I said. "Nobody should be transmitting from White Sand." There was a short silence, the kind that tells you she's looking at something on her end. Then she said, "He called again. Same voice, same request." He sounded calm. Rena whispered, "Someone's trying to pull you away." And I hated how quickly that explanation fit. I told dispatch to log the transmissions, not to give out keys, and to bring county in. Then I made the choice that still gets relitigated in my head. We didn't go back to Powell first. I changed my mind halfway there because if someone was using our channel and imitating my unit number, I needed to know how. If an old site was active that shouldn't be, it could interfere with the search. And if the missing hikers had seen the sign and tried to contact ranger by radio, they might have been lured the same way the caller was trying to lure me. I told Rena we were going to White Sand, but not alone. We met Deputy Caleb Hart at a wide turnout near a closed spur where the pavement ends and the forest road begins. He was late 30s, patient-looking, the kind of face that had learned to stay even. His patrol vehicle was marked, his gear was clean, and he listened without interrupting while I handed him the fake trail sign and showed him the photocopied closure notice from my windshield. His eyes narrowed. "This is new," he said. I told him about the radio transmissions and the request for keys. Caleb glanced at his dash radio like it could answer. "Could be kids," he said, but he didn't sound convinced even as he said it. I told him kids don't know unit numbers, and they don't know what white sand is unless someone hands it to them. Caleb nodded once. "Then we treat it like a person who wants you isolated," he said. "We go together, we stay tight, we don't do anything alone." We drove in a short convoy, my truck leading because I had the forest roads memorized the way you memorize the route to your own kitchen. White Sand Road isn't on most public maps. It's a narrow cut through trees with washouts that get worse every year, and it's the kind of place where you can't pass another vehicle unless one of you is willing to back up a long way. About 5 miles in, we found a gate that should have been locked. It stood open. The chain hung down, and the padlock was gone. Caleb stopped behind me and got out, one hand near his holster. Rena stayed close to my shoulder. I said what I always say when I see a gate opened without documentation. Nobody has authority to open this without logging it. Caleb asked how many people have keys. "Not many," I said, "and someone is asking dispatch for them." A mile later, we found another sign stapled to a tree at a bend. Same message as the trailhead, same frequency, same channel label. This time it wasn't a photocopy. It was printed on weatherproof stock like somebody spent money. Rena said, "That's not a prank." Caleb answered, "That's planning," and his voice had gotten flatter. We reached the relay spur in mid-afternoon and parked near the top. The hut sat in a small clearing, metal door, small window, roof vent, the kind of box that looks boring until you realize it's a box on a mountain with one way in and one way out. A chain wrapped the door with a padlock that looked new enough to shine. I didn't like that the lock was outside. Locks are for keeping people out, but a lock like that can also be a message. Someone expects you to interact with it. Caleb told us to stand back. He took bolt cutters from his trunk and snapped the lock with one clean squeeze. He pulled the chain free and opened the door with his left hand, body angled the way cops do when they've learned not to offer a full target. Inside, the air was stale and warmer than the outside, like the hut had been used recently. That detail hit me first because abandoned structures don't hold heat like that unless something has been running or breathing in them. On the desk sat a handheld radio powered on. Next to it was a Forest Service map spread flat, and on top of the map was a backpack, placed neatly like a staged photograph. The straps were tucked, the zipper half closed, and it looked too clean for something that had been through brush. Rena said it could be theirs, and I told her not to touch it yet, because evidence loses value the second you start treating it like property. Caleb scanned corners in the ceiling. "No one here," he said, but he didn't relax. Then he saw the paperweight, a heavy chunk of steel bolted to the desk to keep papers from shifting. Under it was a single sheet of notebook paper. Caleb lifted it with a pen tip, careful, and we all leaned in without meaning to. It was a list of names. 3 names at first, mine, Rena's, Caleb's. Caleb's jaw tightened. "How would he know mine?" he asked, and I didn't answer because my eyes had gone to the bottom. There was a 4th line written darker, like the writer pressed harder. It wasn't a name, it was a time. 4:30 p.m. Under the time was one word: keys. Rena took a step back, and her voice dropped. "We shouldn't be here," she said. My radio hissed, and a male voice came through calm and close. "Unit 36, it said. "You got there fine." It wasn't dispatch, and it wasn't anybody I knew. The voice sounded like someone sitting in a chair, not like someone running or hiding. Caleb's head snapped between the desk radio and my shoulder mic like he couldn't decide which one to destroy first. I keyed my mic. "Who is this?" I asked. The voice answered right away. "You're late," it said, and then, with the same steady tone, "I need your keys, Ranger. I don't want to hurt your people. You bring them to the desk. You set them down. You walk out." Caleb stepped forward and identified himself. The voice didn't change. "Deputy," it said, "you shouldn't have come." There's a moment in situations like that when your brain tries to turn it into a normal problem, like it's a radio interference issue or a prank you can shut down by sounding confident. Then you feel the shape of it and you realize you're in someone else's plan. I told Caleb we needed to back out. He started moving, slow, controlled. Rena stayed near me,
hands shaking but quiet. Then the door slammed with a hard metal bang that rattled the small window. It didn't feel like wind. It felt timed. A second later, there was a heavy clunk, like something dropped into place on the outside.
Rena grabbed the handle and pulled. The door didn't move. Caleb aimed his pistol at the metal as if intimidation worked on steel. The voice on the radio said, "Keys first." And what made my stomach turn was that the voice wasn't raised. It wasn't excited. It was patient. I looked for another exit and saw the window. It was narrow, too narrow for Caleb to go through easily, but maybe possible if we were desperate. I put my ear near the wall for a second and heard nothing but our own breathing and the low electrical hum of the radio. That's when I noticed something else. A thin cord running through a drilled hole near the doorframe, almost invisible against the metal, like fishing line. The slam made sense then. So did the bar. This wasn't the forest doing it. It was hardware. I grabbed the desk radio and smashed it on the concrete floor. It cracked and went silent, but I knew that didn't matter if the real transmitter was outside. I took my multi-tool and worked at the window seal, prying and cutting until the rubber gave and the pain shifted. Caleb covered the door, Rena stayed close, and for a few seconds, all that existed was the simple work of making an opening big enough to matter. Cold air hit my face when the glass came out. I told Rena to go first. She hesitated like she wanted to argue, then climbed, slid through, and dropped outside with a hard grunt. Caleb came next, bigger shoulders, more struggle, the frame catching him until he forced through with a tight sound that told me it hurt. Then I went, scraping a forearm on the metal edge, landing in dirt and needles on the other side. We ran around the hut to the door. The bar was there in brackets, seated cleanly like it belonged, not like an improvisation. Caleb tried to lift it and felt resistance. He stepped back, fired one shot at the bracket, and the metal popped free enough for him to yank the bar off. When the door swung open, the hut was empty the way it was supposed to be, and the backpack and list were still on the desk like props waiting for the next act. Rena said, "He's nearby," and she didn't mean it as a guess. Caleb looked toward the tree line. "Grant," he said, "behind the hut." I moved around the corner and saw fresh prints in the dirt, quick steps angled away. I followed them 2 paces and stopped, because 2 paces was enough to see what I needed to see. Under a low shrub, tucked into shadow, was a second radio unit still transmitting, with a thin wire running into the hut through a drilled hole. He hadn't been inside. He'd been close enough to hear, far enough to stay out of reach. Caleb said, "He's got gear." And then the clearing cracked with a rifle shot that didn't echo the way a target range shot echoes. It was muffled by trees, close enough to feel. Caleb staggered and went down hard. Rena made one sound, his name, and then she clamped a hand over her mouth like she'd realized sound didn't help. I dropped beside Caleb and tried to talk to him, but his eyes were unfocused and his breathing was wrong, thin and fast. I pressed pressure where I could through his uniform and vest, and I kept pressure there because doing nothing is worse than doing something, even when you know the math is bad. I looked up and saw the shooter between 2 trees 30 to 40 yards out, half covered by branches like he'd built himself a lane. He held the rifle low, not in a rush. He didn't run, he didn't shout. He lifted his free hand and pointed at my belt, then pointed down the road like he wanted a delivery. My keys. He wanted us to carry them to him. I stood slowly with my hands visible, and I told Rena to stay behind me. My mind did a quick inventory. 1 deputy down, 1 seasonal ranger, 1 Forest Service sidearm on my hip. No signal, no backup, and a person who had turned an irrelevant building into a trap. I unhooked my keyring, held it out, and took 1 step forward. The man shifted his rifle toward Rena just enough to make the message clear. I stopped. I set the keys down in the dirt in plain view, slow, and stepped back with my hands still out. The man did not move toward the keys. He moved a half step in a way that suggested he was measuring us, and I made a decision that wasn't brave. It was practical. I fired 1 shot into the dirt near his feet, not to hit him, just to break his rhythm. He paused. Then he fired again, and the round struck the ground near my boot, throwing grit. I grabbed Rena's wrist and pulled her behind the hut. We ran bent low toward the vehicles. Another shot hit the hut wall with a hard clang that made my teeth jar. We reached my truck first, and I shoved Rena into the passenger seat and reached under my own seat for the personal locator beacon I carried for deep backcountry patrols. Most days it was dead weight. That day, it was a lifeline. I activated it and clipped it where it could see sky. The little indicator began blinking. Rena asked if it would work, and I told her it would because I needed my voice to be a tool. Then, I looked back toward the hut and saw Caleb still on the ground, not moving. There are moments where you want to be two people at once, and you can't. I started my truck. The engine turned, coughed, and died. I tried again. Dead. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like a physical thing. I popped the hood and jumped out, and the battery cable was cut clean, not ripped, not loose, cut. Like someone had done it with a tool and then closed the hood gently, because the hood latch had been set cleanly too. I ran to Caleb's patrol car. Same thing. Hood already unlatched, battery cable cut. He'd done it before we arrived. He'd opened the gate, set the signs, staged the hut, rigged the door, and disabled both vehicles in the one place he could predict we'd park. That level of preparation didn't come from a random person wandering the woods. That came from someone who understood how we think. Rena whispered, "What do we do?" I took her hands through the open window and made her look at me. "We walk out," I said. "We stay on the road until we can't. We do not split up. If he shows, you stay behind me and you do what I tell you, even if it feels wrong." Her eyes were wet, but she nodded. I grabbed Caleb's keys from the dirt near where he dropped them during the scramble. Then I froze because my own key ring wasn't where I'd set it. The man had taken it while we ran, or he'd never intended to pick it up in the open in the first place. Either way, it meant he had access to gates, buildings, sheds, and possibly the station. That realization was colder than fear. It was logistics. We started down the road on foot, fast but controlled, with the pistol low at my side and my fingers straight. Every 50 yards I looked back. The beacon blinked on my belt like a small, stubborn eye. I didn't know if anyone would see the alert in time, because out here, in time, is always an argument with distance. Then, from up the road behind us, an engine started. Not my truck, not Caleb's patrol car. Something else. I pulled Rena into the ditch under ferns and brush and held her there. A white pickup rolled past slow, like the driver expected us to step out and wave. No rear plate. The driver stared straight ahead, hands fixed, and did not glance toward the ditch, which was almost worse than if he had. The passenger window was down. On the seat, laid out like a trophy, was my key ring. The pickup continued downhill between us and the only easy way out. When it disappeared around a bend, I felt something settle in me that wasn't panic. It was understanding. He didn't need to chase us like an animal. He could shape the terrain and wait. I took Rena's radio, turned it off, and shoved it into my pack. If he was listening, I wanted him to hear nothing. We left the road and moved into the trees parallel to it, using the ditch line and the breaks in brush to keep cover. We didn't run. Running makes noise and mistakes. We walked fast and quiet, and we watched the ground for anything that looked placed, because by then I trusted nothing that looked convenient. After a long stretch that felt like an hour, the forest thinned and the land dipped toward the river corridor. I checked my phone again. 1 bar. I dialed 911 and put it on speaker, and it rang once before a woman answered. 911, what's your emergency? She said, and the normalcy of her tone almost made my knees give. This is a forest ranger in Clearwater National Forest, I said. Deputy down, active shooter, white sand relay. He has my keys. He's using our channel and staging signs at the trailhead. She started asking questions, and I cut in with the only thing that mattered. Send everyone, I said. State police, county, medical. He cut our vehicles. He planned this. When I hung up, I called dispatch directly. This time, dispatch answered like she'd been holding her breath. Grant, she said. We got your beacon alert. Units are moving. I told her to get people to Wilderness Gateway because the hikers might be alive and the signs at the trailhead were designed to steer them. I told her Caleb was down at the relay site. There was a half-second of silence, and then she said, "Copy," in a voice that sounded smaller than it had all day. We reached the highway shoulder near a turnout as sirens began to echo faintly through the corridor. 2 state police vehicles appeared first, then a sheriff unit.
I stepped into view with my hands up, Rena doing the same, because the last thing we needed was to be mistaken for threats. A trooper ran to us and asked if we were hurt. I told him no, and I told him the shooter had my keyring. The trooper asked where the deputy was, and when I said it out loud, it sounded unreal. They told us to stay put. We sat on gravel and watched a line of vehicles push into the forest road faster than I would have thought was possible, lights bouncing between trees. I kept staring at the bend where the road disappeared, waiting to see the white pickup come back out like it belonged. It didn't, and that absence felt intentional too. Hours later, near dusk, a sheriff captain came back and knelt in front of us. He kept his voice steady the way professionals do when they're carrying weight for other people. "We located the deputy," he said. "He didn't make it." Rena covered her mouth and cried without sound, shoulders shaking, and I stared at the river because if I looked at her, I was going to break in a way I couldn't control. The captain told us they located the suspect vehicle, the white pickup, abandoned deeper in the forest without a plate. The man fled on foot. Dogs and air support boxed him near a drainage ditch before dark. "Contained" was the word the captain used first, and when I asked if they got him, he nodded. "Alive," he said. "In custody." Then he added the detail that made the whole day tilt again. "We found one hiker alive," he said. "He was tied inside a culvert near the trailhead, hidden behind brush. He's going to survive." My throat closed, because that meant the trailhead sign wasn't just bait for staff. It was bait for the hikers, too, a way to keep them close to a place the attacker controlled. The captain told us the other hiker was deceased and had been left off trail, covered, and he didn't go into details. He didn't need to. After statements, after calls, after the kind of administrative processing that happens even when people are hurting, I went home and sat at my kitchen table staring at the wall. I kept replaying the clean parts of the day, the ordinary parts, and seeing how they could be turned into handles for someone else. That night, dispatch called again. "Grant," she said, "we found something at White Sand." "A binder," she said, "under the desk, labeled with your district name. Inside are shift notes, maps, and a list of gate codes. There's also a clean closure sign, pre-printed, dated tomorrow." I didn't speak, because what do you say to proof that someone was planning to do it again? Dispatch added, "And Grant, the binder has your full name on the inside cover. Not just Grant, full name, middle name too." I hadn't written my middle name on anything public in years. I set the phone down and stared at my key hook by the door, empty now, because the sheriff had already told me my keys were evidence and every lock I had access to would need to be replaced. In the report, this incident ends with the suspect in custody and resources restored. In real life, it ends with a quieter lesson that sticks. Somebody didn't need the wilderness to hide. He just needed us to trust the wrong sign.